In a wheelchair, she came hoping for love. But what this single dad did when he saw her sitting alone at the worst table in the restaurant made her cry in front of everyone. And when he pulled out a worn photograph from his pocket and placed it on the table between them, nobody saw it coming. Not her, not the waiters watching, and certainly not the strangers who would witness what happened next on that dance floor. This is the story of Lara, a woman who had convinced herself she was invisible, and Kieran, a father so desperate to save his son that he was willing to ask a complete stranger the one question that had been breaking his heart for 2 years. If stories about second chances, unexpected connections, and the kind of love that sees past the surface speak to your soul, you're exactly where you need to be. But before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from. We love seeing how far a story reach. The rain had started 20 minutes before the accessible taxi arrived. Lara sat in her apartment, watching the droplets race down the window glass, and wondered for the 100th time if she should cancel. The invitation had been sitting on her vanity for a week, a blind date arranged by an old colleague who insisted that Lara had spent enough time hiding in the shadows. The venue was the Obsidian Swan, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Velvet drapes, dim lighting, a wait list that stretched for months. For most women, a Friday evening there would be a dream. For Lara, it was a logistical campaign. She had spent an hour getting ready. The deep emerald dress flowed over her legs like water, hiding the muscle atrophy she was still self-conscious about. She had curled her auburn hair, letting it cascade over her shoulders. Her makeup was subtle but deliberate, a shield against the stares she knew were coming. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a beautiful woman, but she didn't feel like one. The taxi arrived 17 minutes late. The lift mechanism groaned loudly as it lowered her to the sidewalk, drawing the attention of pedestrians who stopped to watch. A mother pulled her child closer, as if disability were contagious. A businessman stepped wide around her, avoiding eye contact. Lara had learned to pretend she didn't notice. The Obsidian Swan rose before her like a temple, all glass and golden light spilling onto the wet pavement. And there, at the entrance, 3 marble steps gleamed in the lamplight. No ramp. Lara sat in the rain for a long moment, staring at those steps. They looked innocent enough, decorative even, but to her they were a fortress wall, a reminder that the world had been built for other people, and she was just borrowing space in it. A valet finally noticed her. He scurried over, umbrella forgotten, looking panicked. "Ma'am, do you need, assistance?" "I need to get inside," Lara said, keeping her voice steady despite the humiliation already burning in her chest. "Is there another entrance?" There was. It led through the kitchen. 5 minutes later, Lara found herself navigating a maze of stainless steel counters and shouting line cooks. A waiter carrying a tray of steaming bisque had to flatten himself against the wall to let her pass. Another nearly tripped over her footrests, cursing under his breath before catching himself. The tile floor was slick with grease and water. Her wheels slipped twice. By the time she emerged into the main dining room, her carefully curled hair was frizzing from the kitchen steam, and her cheeks were flushed with embarrassment. The host, a thin man with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes, looked at her wheelchair, then at the crowded dining room, then back at her chair. "You have a reservation for Kieran?" he asked, consulting his leather-bound book. "Yes." "Right. Well," he clicked his tongue, "the originally booked table is in a rather tight corner. The equipment won't fit comfortably." Equipment, as if she were a piece of furniture that needed storage. "I'll place you near the service station," he continued, already walking. "More spacious there." More spacious was a generous term. The table was positioned directly beside the door where servers entered and exited the kitchen. The constant swing of the door created a draft that raised goosebumps on Lara's bare arms. Every few seconds, a waiter would rush past, punching orders into a small terminal mounted on the wall beside her. The clatter of dirty cutlery being dumped into plastic bins provided a percussive soundtrack to her humiliation. But Lara didn't argue. She had learned years ago that arguing only made things worse. It drew more attention, more stares, more of those pitying smiles that made her feel like a charity case rather than a customer. She reversed her chair into the cramped space, locked the brakes, and waited.
7 o'clock came and went. Then 7:15, 7:20. Lara checked her phone. No messages, no calls, no "running late, be there soon" text. She had been stood up before, more times than she cared to count. Men would agree to dates without fully understanding what her situation meant. They would see her profile picture, cropped strategically above the waist, and imagine a normal evening. Then they would arrive, see the wheels, and suddenly remember a work emergency or a sick relative or any excuse that allowed them to escape. Some didn't even bother with excuses. They would see her from across the room, turn around, and walk out. At 7:25, Lara reached for her purse. She had been foolish to come, foolish to hope, foolish to believe that this time might be different. Her fingers were just closing around her phone when the restaurant's front door burst open. He looked like he had run through a hurricane. His charcoal suit was rumpled, the tie loosened and slightly crooked. Rain had plastered his dark hair to his forehead, and gray streaked his temples in a way that suggested more stress than age. His chest heaved as he scanned the dining room with wild, desperate eyes. When those eyes landed on Lara, something remarkable happened. He didn't freeze. He didn't flinch. He didn't do that subtle double-take she had grown so accustomed to, the one where men's gazes would drop to her wheels and their expressions would shift from interest to discomfort. Instead, his shoulders dropped in visible relief, and he smiled. He wove through the crowded tables with purpose, nearly knocking over a busboy in his haste, and arrived at her table breathless and apologetic. "Lara?" He bent slightly, hands on his knees, catching his breath. "Please tell me you're Lara." "I am." "Oh, thank goodness." He straightened, running a hand through his wet hair and making it stand up in odd directions. "I am so incredibly sorry. The sitter canceled at the last possible second. Then my son couldn't find his inhaler and I had to tear apart the entire apartment looking for it. It was in his backpack, by the way, which is apparently the last place a 7-year-old thinks to look. And then the traffic on the bridge was backed up for miles because of a fender bender. And I know none of that is your problem. And I know I look like a complete disaster right now, but I promise I'm not usually this chaotic." Lara stared. He was still talking, still apologizing, still radiating anxious energy like a man who had genuinely been terrified of missing this date. Not uncomfortable, not looking for an exit, just worried. "It's okay," she said, and was surprised to find that she meant it. "You're here now."
He exhaled again, pressing his palm to his chest. "Kieran. Obviously, I should have started with that." He extended his hand, then noticed it was damp from the rain and wiped it hastily on his jacket before offering it again. "It's really nice to finally meet you." His handshake was warm and firm. He held her gaze the entire time. "You look stunning, by the way," he added as he took his seat. "That green is... wow. Sorry, I'm still catching my breath, but seriously, wow." A flush crept up Lara's neck. "Thank you." The waiter appeared, a different one than before, younger and seemingly less hostile, and Kieran ordered a bottle of wine without looking at the menu. "Whatever you recommend," he said. "We're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" Lara asked once the waiter left. "Making it here without completely falling apart," Kieran grinned, and for a moment the exhaustion in his eyes lifted. "That counts as a victory in my book." The conversation started tentatively, the way first dates always do. They traded the basic information: jobs, hobbies, how they knew their mutual friend who had arranged this meeting. Lara kept her answers careful. She mentioned her work as a freelance graphic designer, the clients she worked with from home, the flexibility that allowed her to set her own schedule. She did not mention that she had once been a landscape architect. She did not mention the gardens she used to design, gardens she could no longer walk through. Some losses were too heavy for first date conversation. "And you?" she asked. "Our friend mentioned you're in logistics." "Supply chain management," he nodded, fiddling with the stem of his wine glass. "It sounds boring because it is boring, but it pays the bills, and it's flexible enough that I can handle everything else." "Everything else?" He hesitated. His eyes flickered to his phone, sitting face up beside his plate. For a moment, Lara felt her heart sink. She knew that gesture, the glance at the phone, the subtle impatience, the search for an escape route. But then Kieran looked back at her, and his expression wasn't impatience. It was worry. "I'm a single dad," he said quietly, "full-time. My wife, she left about 2 years ago." "I'm sorry." The words came automatically, but Lara meant them. "That must be incredibly hard." "It was harder on my boy, Toby. He's 7. Before Lara could respond, a waiter squeezed past our table. His hip caught the back of her wheelchair hard enough to jolt her forward, her chest pressing against the table's edge.
"Hey," the waiter snapped, spinning around with an irritated glare. "You're blocking the aisle. Can you move in?" Ilara's face burned. "I'm sorry, I can't. The space doesn't—" "It's a fire hazard," the waiter interrupted. "You're going to get someone hurt." The dining room felt suddenly very quiet. Or maybe that was just Ilara's imagination. Maybe it was just the blood rushing in her ears, the familiar shame flooding her chest, the overwhelming urge to shrink and disappear. "Maybe we should go," she whispered to Kieran, not meeting his eyes. "I'm just in the way here." She expected him to agree. She expected relief on his face, the easy out she was offering him. Instead, when she finally looked up, she found something else entirely in his expression. Cold, hard, focused. The nervous, flustered man who had stumbled in from the rain was gone. "You are not in the way." Kieran's voice was quiet, but it carried an edge that made Ilara's breath catch. "It's fine," she said quickly. "Really, I'm used to—" "No," he held up a hand. "You shouldn't be." Before she could protest further, Kieran stood. He didn't excuse himself. He didn't say he was going to the restroom. He simply rose from his chair and walked with deliberate purpose toward the host stand at the front of the restaurant. Lara watched, frozen, as he approached the thin man who had seated them. She couldn't hear the conversation. The ambient noise of the restaurant swallowed the words, but she could read the body language. Kieran wasn't yelling, he wasn't making a scene, but his posture radiated quiet authority. He stood close, speaking low and intense, his gestures controlled but emphatic. At one point, he turned and pointed directly at the cramped table by the service station where Lara sat. Then he pointed to a beautiful, spacious table near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a table that had just been cleared, overlooking the glittering city skyline. The host shook his head, consulting his reservation book. Kieran leaned in closer. The host glanced over at Lara, then back at Kieran. His face went pale. He nodded. Kieran returned to the table with a calm that bordered on serene. "We're moving." "What?" "Grab your wine. We're taking the window seat."
"Kieran, you really didn't have to." "I did." He picked up both their wine glasses, balancing them carefully. He collected her small clutch purse, tucking it under his arm, and then he stood behind her wheelchair, but he didn't just grab the handles. He paused. "May I?" he asked. 2 words, such small words, but they landed in Lara's chest like a revelation. In 4 years, she could count on one hand the number of people who had asked before touching her chair. Most assumed, most grabbed. Most treated her mobility device like a shopping cart, steering her wherever they thought she needed to go, without consulting her. "Yes," she whispered. He wheeled her through the center of the dining room. Not around the edges, not through the kitchen, through the center. He walked with his head high, his stride unhurried, daring anyone in that restaurant to stare. A few people did look up, and quickly looked away when they met his eyes. He positioned her at the window table with the precision of someone who had thought carefully about the logistics. He removed the chair opposite her, creating space for her wheelchair to pull directly up to the table at a comfortable angle. He set her wine glass in front of her, placed her purse on the empty seat beside her, and finally sat down across from her. Through the window, the city sparkled. Rain streaked down the glass, turning the lights into watercolor smears of gold and white. For the first time all evening, Lara didn't feel like an obstacle. She felt like a guest. "You didn't have to do that," she said again, but the words had lost their protest. They were softer now, wondering. "I did," Kieran repeated. He picked up his wine glass and took a long sip, as if the confrontation had cost him something. "Nobody gets to treat you like that, not while I'm sitting here." Something shifted between them in that moment. The awkwardness of strangers meeting for the first time melted away, replaced by something raw, more honest. Kieran set down his glass. He folded his hands on the table and looked at her with an intensity that made Ilara's heart beat faster. "Lara," began his voice, dropping an octave, "I need to be honest with you about something." Here it comes, she thought, the catch, the complication, the reason this is too good to be true. "I almost didn't come tonight." She braced herself. "Because of me?" "No." He shook his head firmly. "Not because of you, because of me." He paused, searching for the right words. "Because I didn't think I was ready." "Ready for dating? Ready to hope?"
The word hung in the air between them. Hope. Such a fragile thing. Such a dangerous thing to want. Kieran reached into his jacket pocket. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he were about to show her something sacred. His fingers emerged holding a small, worn photograph, its edges soft from being handled, carried, studied over and over again. He placed it on the white tablecloth between them. Lara looked down, and the world tilted. The boy in the photograph had bright blue eyes and a wild mop of blonde hair that looked like it had never met a comb. His smile was huge, gap-toothed, radiant with the unself-conscious joy that only children possess. He was sitting in a wheelchair, a bright red pediatric manual chair, smaller than Lara's but unmistakable. His thin legs were strapped in, positioned carefully. His hands rested on the wheel rims in a way that suggested he had learned to push himself. Lara's breath left her body. She looked up at Kieran. "This is Toby," he said. His voice was thick, heavy with an emotion he was barely containing. "My son." Lara opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked back at the photograph, at the little boy grinning up at the camera, and felt something crack open in her chest. 2 years ago, Kieran continued, Toby got sick. It started like a normal flu. Fever, aches. We thought it would pass in a few days. He paused, swallowing hard. It didn't pass. What happened? Transverse myelitis, that's what the doctors called it. A rare viral infection that attacks the spinal cord. Kieran's jaw tightened. Within 48 hours, he couldn't feel his legs. Within 72 hours, the paralysis was permanent. Lara pressed her hand to her mouth. She knew that speed. She knew how quickly a life could divide itself between before and after. She had lived it. He was 5, Kieran said quietly, 5 years old. He didn't understand what was happening. He kept asking when his legs would wake up, when he could run again, when he could play soccer like the other kids. His voice broke on the last word. He looked away, blinking rapidly. The restaurant noise faded into a distant hum. In that moment, there was only this table, this man, this photograph of a little boy whose life had been rewritten without his permission.
"Your wife," Lara said gently. "You said she left." Kieran nodded. 3 months after the diagnosis. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. She said she didn't sign up for this. Ramps, catheters, IEP meetings at school. She said it was too depressing, but she felt trapped. She left her son? She left both of us. Kieran picked up the photograph, studying his son's face. I don't think she was a bad person. I think she was scared and selfish, and she couldn't see past her own fear. But understanding why she left doesn't make it hurt less, especially for Toby. Lara thought about her own experience, the friends who had drifted away after her accident, the boyfriend who had broken up with her 6 weeks into her rehabilitation, the family members who didn't know what to say, so they stopped calling altogether. Some people couldn't handle proximity to suffering. They treated it like a contagious disease. For 2 years, Kieran continued, I've been doing this alone. Every morning routine, every doctor's appointment, every school pickup, every meltdown. He set the photograph down gently, and I've been angry, so angry, at the world, at the universe, at strangers who stare, at buildings with stairs and no ramps, at parents who don't invite Toby to birthday parties because the venue isn't accessible. His voice cracked again. I've been protecting him like a guard dog, snarling at anyone who gets too close, because I didn't know what else to do. Lara reached across the table. Her hand hovered over his, asking permission the way he had asked before touching her chair. He turned his palm up, and she took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and desperate. Tonight, Kieran said, before I left for this date, Toby had a meltdown. What happened? There's a boy in his class, Finn, having a birthday party this weekend at a trampoline park. Kieran's throat worked. Toby wasn't invited. The mom said it was because the venue wasn't wheelchair accessible, but Toby heard the other kids talking. He knows Finn doesn't want him there. He knows he's different. Oh no. He was sobbing, inconsolable. He told me he was broken. He told me he was useless. He asked me why he couldn't just be normal like everyone else.
Lara felt her own tears threatening. She blinked them back, squeezing Kieran's hand. I didn't know what to say to him, Kieran whispered. I'm just his dad. I have working legs. I can run and jump and do all the things he can't. I can't truly understand what he's going through. I felt so helpless. He looked up at Lara then, really looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't seen from anyone in 4 years. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her with hope. When our mutual friend showed me your picture, he said, I didn't just see a beautiful woman. I saw a survivor. I saw someone who is living the reality that my son has to face for the rest of his life. Someone who knows what it's like to be stared at, dismissed, underestimated. Someone who didn't give up. Kieran, wait, please, let me finish. He took a shaky breath. I walked into this restaurant tonight, and I saw you sitting by that service door. I saw that waiter treat you like an inconvenience, like luggage to be moved out of the way, and I saw you sit there with dignity. You didn't scream, you didn't leave. You held your head up in that green dress like it was armor. A tear slipped down Ilara's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. I need to ask you something, Kieran said, and I know it might be too much for a first date. I know it might be inappropriate, but I have to ask. Ask me. What do I tell him? The successful logistics manager was gone. The put-together adult had vanished. All that remained was a desperate father, pleading for a map through territory he couldn't navigate alone. What do I tell a 7-year-old boy who thinks his life is over? How do I make him see what I see when I look at you right now? Lara closed her eyes. The tears came faster now, trailing silently down her cheeks. For 4 years she had been invisible. Men looked past her. Employers dismissed her. Strangers avoided her gaze. She had become so accustomed to being unseen that she had started to believe she deserved it. And now this man, this exhausted, heartbroken, beautiful man, was looking at her like she held the answer to the most important question in his world. "You tell him," Lara said, her voice trembling, "that the chair is just his shoes." "His shoes?" Kieran frowned slightly. "It's how he gets around, that's all. Some people wear sneakers, some people wear boots. Toby uses wheels. It doesn't make him less, it just makes him different. And different isn't broken." Kieran nodded slowly, drinking in her words. "You tell him that he is not the chair. The chair is a tool. Like glasses help people see and hearing aids help people hear, the chair helps him move. It doesn't define who he is." "Okay." Kieran's voice was hoarse. "Okay. And you tell him—" Lara choked on a sob. She had to pause, pressing her free hand to her chest, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs. "You tell him that he can still be the hero of his own story. He can still have adventures. He can still fall in love and have a career and travel the world and do amazing things. It just means his story is going to be more interesting than everyone else's." She opened her eyes and met Kieran's gaze. "The other kids at that trampoline park, they'll forget that birthday by next month. But Toby, he's going to have a story that matters, a story that teaches people something, a story that changes hearts." Kieran was crying now, silently, without shame, tears tracking down his cheeks and dripping onto his rumpled tie. He didn't wipe them away either. "Thank you," he mouthed, unable to give the words volume. "Thank you," Lara whispered back, "for seeing me." For a long moment, they simply sat there, hands intertwined across the table, two broken people finding something unexpected in each other's fractures. The soft piano music in the background shifted. A slow, melodic waltz filled the air. And Kieran stood up. Lara watched him, confused, as he walked around the table to her side. Other couples in the restaurant were drifting toward the small dance floor in the center of the room, drawn by the romantic melody. Kieran stopped beside her chair. He extended her hand. "Dance with me." Ilara's heart seized. Panic flooded her system, the cold, familiar dread that had become her constant companion since the accident. She looked at his outstretched hand, then at the dance floor where couples swayed gracefully on their feet, and felt the impossibility of the request crash over her. "Kieran, I can't." Her voice came out strangled. People are watching. I can't stand. I can't." "I know," he said softly. "I know people will look. I know it won't be like the dancing you used to do." "Then why?" "Because you can still dance." His eyes held hers, fierce and tender at once. "Let me lead. Trust me." Lara stared at him. Her mind screamed warnings, the humiliation, the stares, the vulnerability. But beneath the fear, something else was stirring. Something she had buried so deep she had forgotten it existed. Hope. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, steady and sure. He stood, guiding her toward the dance floor. He didn't push her chair from behind like a piece of equipment. He walked beside her, their joined hands leading the way, as if they were any other couple approaching the floor. The other dancers noticed them. Of course they did. Some stepped back to make room, others whispered to their partners. Lara felt the weight of their attention like a physical pressure, and for a moment she wanted to retreat. Then Kieran stopped. He positioned himself in front of her, and he did something that made everything else fade away. He placed his right hand on her waist. Not on the handle of her chair, not on the armrest, on her waist, just as he would if she were standing.
His touch was light but deliberate, a statement of intent. His left hand held her right, lifted slightly, the traditional frame of a waltz. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He began to move. It wasn't like any dance Lara had ever experienced. There were no complicated steps, no dramatic dips, no footwork to master. Instead, Kieran guided her in slow, sweeping circles. He stepped backward, drawing her forward. He stepped to the side, and her chair glided with him. He spun her gently, so gently, and the wheels turned beneath her in a graceful arc she hadn't known was possible. He wasn't pushing a wheelchair. He was dancing with a woman. The music swelled around them, piano notes cascading like falling stars. The other couples had stopped dancing. They stood at the edges of the floor, watching. But there was no mockery in their expressions, no pity, just wonder. Kieran spun her again, slightly faster this time, and Lara felt something extraordinary. She felt light. For 4 years she had felt heavy. Her body, her chair, her grief, all of it had weighed on her like stones tied to her chest. Every morning was an effort. Every outing was a battle. She had forgotten what it felt like to move freely, joyfully, without thinking about obstacles and logistics and other people's discomfort. But here, now, with Kieran's hand warm on her waist and the music carrying them both, she felt weightless. "See?" Kieran whispered, leaning close enough that his breath tickled her ear. "You're flying." Lara threw her head back and laughed.
It burst out of her, a wet, jagged, uncontrollable sound that was half joy and half release. It echoed across the dance floor, startling the watching diners, but she didn't care. She laughed until the laughter turned to tears, until she was sobbing and laughing at the same time, her chest heaving with emotions she had held prisoner for years. Kieran didn't stop dancing. He kept her moving, kept her spinning, kept her flying even as she fell apart. When the song finally ended, he slowed to a stop. The restaurant was absolutely silent. Every eye in the room was fixed on them, but Kieran seemed to have forgotten anyone else existed. He knelt down in front of her chair. Right there, in the middle of the dance floor, in front of strangers and waiters and the host who had tried to hide her by the kitchen, he knelt so that they were eye to eye. From his pocket, he produced a cloth napkin. Gently, so gently, he reached up and dabbed the tears from her cheeks. "Why are you crying?" he asked softly, though his own eyes were red-rimmed and wet. Lara tried to answer. The words stuck in her throat. She tried again. "Because," she finally managed, her voice cracking on every syllable, "because for such a long time, I thought I was invisible. I thought no one would ever really see me again. I thought the real me was gone, and all that was left was the chair." She reached out and touched his face, her fingers trembling against his jaw. "But you see me." Kieran covered her hand with his own. "I do," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I see you perfectly, Ila, and you are not invisible. You are the most visible person in this room. You are radiant." He turned his head and pressed a kiss to her palm, right against the calluses she had developed from pushing her wheels. It was such a specific gesture, such an intimate acknowledgement of her reality that it broke something loose inside her. She leaned forward, and he met her halfway. Their foreheads touched. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing together, existing in a bubble that excluded the rest of the world. Finally, Kieran pulled back. He was smiling now, a real smile, the exhaustion in his eyes replaced by something warmer. "Now, I have a very important question for you." "Another one?" "The most important one of the night." He moved behind her chair, asking permission with a glance first, and began wheeling her back toward their table.
My son has a strict no vegetables policy, which I've learned to work around with creative bribery. But he has a very serious sweet tooth, and I think I'm going to need help selecting a dessert to bring home to him.
Lara looked up at him over her shoulder. You want me to help you pick a dessert for Toby? I want you to help me pick a dessert we can share with Toby. Kieran's voice was carefully casual, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper, something tentative and hopeful. Because I have a feeling he's going to want to meet you, and I have a feeling you might have some things to teach him that his father never could. Ilara's heart swelled until she thought it might burst. I'd love that, she said. I'd love that very much. They returned to their table by the window. The city lights still sparkled through the rain-streaked glass. The waiter, a new one, polite and attentive, brought them the dessert menu with a genuine smile. And as Lara sat there, studying the options and debating the merits of chocolate lava cake versus tiramisu, she realized something that made her eyes sting with fresh tears. She had come to this restaurant hoping for love. She had found something more. She had found purpose, connection, the beginning of a family that didn't need perfection, only acceptance. And for the first time in 4 years, she believed her story was just getting started. You know, there's something powerful about being truly seen by another person. Not looked at, not observed, not assessed, but seen. Lara had spent 4 years believing that her wheelchair made her invisible, that people saw the chair first and stopped looking for the person inside. And maybe some people did. But Kieran looked past the wheels and found a warrior. He found someone who had survived the unthinkable and kept going. He found hope for his son in a woman he had just met at a blind date. And in doing so, he reminded Lara that she was worth finding. Sometimes the people who see us most clearly are the ones who've been searching for exactly what we have to offer. Sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest gifts, not because suffering is beautiful, but because survival is. Toby was going to meet a woman who could answer questions his father couldn't. Lara was going to meet a little boy who would remind her why her story mattered. And Kieran was going to learn that he didn't have to navigate this journey alone. 3 people, brought together by chance, connected by struggle, building something new from the pieces of what they had lost. If this story touched your heart, I would love for you to be part of the Soul Tales family. That subscribe button is right there. 1 click and you'll be notified whenever we share another story about love, resilience, and the moments that remind us what it means to be human. Drop a comment below if you've ever felt invisible and then found someone who finally saw you. I read every single comment, and your stories inspire everything we create here. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose heart might be waiting for exactly these words. And remember, your story isn't over. It's just getting to the good part. Until next time, this is Soul Tales.